Every image in your head of the golden age of flying, the champagne, the white gloves, the pilots who looked like movie stars. One company put it there, Pan Am. Not really an airline at all. A promise. The entire world on schedule. Pan Am launched America's jet age in 1958. It launched the jumbo jet age in 1970. At its height, it flew 11 million passengers a year to 86 countries and sat on $1 billion in cash, over $7 billion in today's money. It was, by its own famous boast, the world's most experienced airline. Nobody argued. And right now, in 2026, you can book a Pan Am journey again for $59,950 a seat. But the airline behind that logo has been dead for 35 years. And here's the part the nostalgia never tells you. No rival killed it. Pan Am financed its own funeral, selling a piece of itself to survive each crisis, until the only thing left to sell was the name. This is the rise and fall of Pan Am, the airline that invented the world and couldn't live in it. The greatest airline in history began with a rented plane and a deadline it barely made. In 1927, a young, relentlessly well-connected businessman named Juan Trippe arranged a merger of Colonial Air and two other small airlines to form Pan American Airways, with himself as president. The whole operation launched on about $250,000 in startup capital, pocket change, even then, for a company that intended to own the sky. On October 19, 1927, Pan Am's first flight lifted off from Key West, Florida, bound for Havana, Cuba. The aircraft wasn't even theirs. It was a rented Fairchild FC-2 float plane, hired at the last moment so the company could hold on to its mail contract. From that borrowed beginning, Trippe built with astonishing speed. On January 9, 1929, Pan Am inaugurated its first passenger flight from Miami to San Juan by way of Belize and Managua. Latin America first, then the oceans, then everything. And Trippe had a weapon no other airline could match, the most famous man in America. Charles Lindbergh came to work for Pan American as technical advisor and pilot of survey flights through Latin America. And with Lindbergh aboard, the U.S. government viewed Pan Am very favorably. That mattered more than any aircraft, because Trippe's real invention wasn't a route or a plane. It was a status. Pan Am became Washington's chosen instrument, the unofficial flag carrier of the United States, handed first-mover access to nearly every international route while competitors were locked out for decades. Understand what a gift that was, and understand what it cost, because this is the original sin of the whole story. Pan Am got the world, and only the world. While United, American, and Delta spent half a century building dense domestic networks across the United States, feeding passengers from Des Moines and Memphis into their big routes, Pan Am built almost nothing at home. It didn't need to. The monopoly was the moat. A monopoly granted is not a monopoly earned. Trippe's empire rested from day one on a political favor that could be revoked. Everyone inside the blue globe forgot that. For 50 years they could afford to. By the 1950s, Pan Am's flying boats, the great clippers, had already shrunk the oceans. Juan Trippe wanted to erase them entirely. In 1955, he placed an order for Boeing 707s and Douglas DC-8s, valued at $270 million. A staggering commitment to jets that were, at that moment, barely more than blueprints. Trippe was betting the balance sheet that the future would arrive on time. It did. On October 26, 1958, Pan Am began regular Boeing 707 service, the flight that ushered in the U.S. jet age. Overnight, the Atlantic became a workday, Europe became a weekend, and Pan Am wasn't just first, it was the author. The uniforms, the service, the swagger, the entire template of glamorous international jet travel was written by one company, and every airline on Earth has been copying it ever since. The numbers from the peak still read like fiction. In 1966, Pan Am carried 6.7 million passengers. By 1968, its 150 jets flew to 86 countries across 81,410 unduplicated route miles, and the company was profitable, sitting on $1 billion in cash reserves. That's over $7 billion today, held by an airline. The world's most experienced airline wasn't a slogan, it was an audit. In 1968, at the summit, Juan Trippe retired as president and CEO, the man who had run the airline in effect since the day it was founded. But before he left, he made one last Trippe-sized bet. He committed Pan Am to launching Boeing's next leap, a plane so enormous the industry wasn't sure airports could hold it, the 747. And here is the pattern worth naming, because it's the second seed of the fall. Being first with every jet generation is exactly what made Pan Am king. The 707 bet paid off beyond imagination, so the 747 bet looked like wisdom, not gambling. But every one of those bets loaded the company with enormous, inflexible aircraft debt. When you're a protected monopoly in a booming market, debt is leverage. When the protection ends and the market turns, debt is an anchor. Pan Am was about to discover it had ordered the anchor in bulk. On January 22, 1970, the Boeing 747 entered service with Pan Am, and once again, the future arrived wearing the blue globe. That year, Pan Am flew 11 million passengers to 86 countries. The jumbo age had begun, and Pan Am had, again, invented it. The timing could not have been worse. 3 years later, the oil shocks hit, and jet fuel prices went vertical. With Pan Am now operating a fleet of the thirstiest aircraft ever built, bought with borrowed money into a market suddenly too soft to fill them. Pan Am never quite recovered from the oil crises of the early 1970s, despite all of its 1950s and 60s success. The anchor had caught the seabed. Then, Washington took back the favor. The Airline Deregulation Act of 1978 threw open the industry, and it, alongside the other shocks of the era, destroyed both revenue and passenger confidence. For United, American, and Delta, deregulation was an invitation. Their vast domestic networks could now funnel millions of passengers into international flying. For Pan Am, it was an execution order. The chosen instrument had spent 50 years as the world's airline and nobody's hometown carrier. It entered the deregulated era with wings and no routes. 0 domestic feeder routes, competing against carriers who could fill a transatlantic jet from 40 cities Pan Am didn't serve. Pan Am's chairman, William Sewell, understood the problem precisely. His solution became mistake number 3. Late in 1979, Pan Am received approval for the $437 million acquisition of National Airlines. Finally, a domestic network. On paper, it was the obvious move. Deregulation was about to reward exactly the kind of connected domestic international system Pan Am lacked. In practice, it was a disaster that historians would later file under too expensive and poorly timed. National's routes ran north-south, up and down the East Coast, providing barely any feed at Pan Am's transatlantic and transpacific gateways. The fleets didn't match. The corporate cultures didn't match. The integration was botched, and labor costs climbed. The bottom line tells it brutally. After the merger, revenues rose 62%, while fuel costs rose 157%, and miscellaneous expenses rose 74%. Pan Am had paid $437 million to grow its costs faster than its business. And now the company that had always paid for the future with tomorrow's profits had a new problem. Tomorrow's profits weren't coming, and the bills were. Somewhere high up in the Pan Am building, someone began making a list of everything the company owned. What happens next is the heart of this story, and it's the part the spreadsheets always miss. Starting in 1980, Pan Am began surviving each crisis by selling the things that made survival worth it. First, the crown. In November 1980, the Pan Am Building, the company's own name in giant letters above Grand Central, the most famous corporate address in New York, was sold to the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company for $400 million. That's about $1.24 billion in today's dollars, and it bought exactly what asset sales always buy: time and nothing else. In September 1981, C. Edward Acker, founder and ex-president of Air Florida, replaced Sewell as chairman. That same year, Juan Trippe died, spared the sight of what came next. Acker was a cautious but optimistic manager, and his strategy was the only one left: keep divesting. The Intercontinental Hotel chain, anything not bolted to a wing. Then, in 1985, the unthinkable. Pan Am sold its Pacific division, its Asian routes, the empire Trippe had pioneered across the world's biggest ocean, to United Airlines for a reported $750 million. Other accounts put the figure at $715.5 million. Whatever the exact number, the scale is not in dispute. It represented a quarter of Pan Am's entire route system, handed to a competitor. See the mechanism, because it's the same ratchet that kills every empire in decline. Each sale was individually rational, the only liquidity available, the only way through the quarter. But Pan Am kept hoping the cash would fund a turnaround, and instead, each rescue left the airline weaker. Fewer routes generating operating revenue, and more dependence on transatlantic flying, just as that market came under ferocious competitive pressure. Every rescue narrowed the company that had to survive the next crisis. Pan Am wasn't saving itself, it was eating itself, course by course, and calling it a diet. And then came December 21, 1988. 4 days before Christmas, Pan Am Flight 103 exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland. 270 people were killed, all 259 aboard the plane, and 11 residents of Lockerbie on the ground, people who were simply at home on a December night. It was a terrorist atrocity, a bomb, an act of mass murder that investigators would trace to Libyan intelligence. And no business decision caused it. Stay with the human arithmetic for a moment, because the dollar figures that follow will try to bury it. 270 people flying in the last week before Christmas. That is hundreds of families who spent that Christmas, and every Christmas after, with an empty chair at the table. Wreckage scattered across the Scottish hills that belonged to people whose relatives were already waiting for them. A small town that woke up the next morning to find the sky had fallen on it. And what the investigation revealed about Pan Am was devastating in its own right. Through the 1980s, under mounting losses, the airline had treated security as a cost line in a decade when it was anything but. In the aftermath, Pan Am faced a $300 million lawsuit and FAA fines for 19 separate security violations. litigation that would ultimately produce the largest total payout in a commercial aviation case, over $500 million. The airline that had defined safe passage across the world was now, in the public mind, the airline of Lockerbie. Bookings sagged, the losses deepened, and Pan Am limped toward 1991 with almost nothing left on the list to sell. Almost. By the start of 1991, a $2 billion loss stood behind the airline, and there was nothing left to feed the ratchet. On January 8, 1991, Pan American World Airways filed for bankruptcy protection. Thomas Plaskett, the final CEO, framed the filing as the beginning of a new era. The market disagreed. The survival plan was real, and it was small. Sell the transatlantic routes and the Northeast Shuttle to Delta Airlines, and use Delta's cash to relaunch as a compact carrier. Around 60 aircraft, roughly $1.2 billion in annual revenues, 7,500 employees. On November 1, 1991, the new, shrunken Pan Am actually began flying. For 33 days, the Blue Globe lived, but the entire structure hung from a single hook: Delta's financing commitment. It was the only capital available, and Pan Am, the company that had bet everything on one government, one jet, one merger, now bet its existence on one counterparty, while losing up to $3 million every single day through the final weeks of 1991. Then Delta withdrew the funding commitment it had made as part of the purchase. And that sentence is the entire death certificate. There was no fallback. There had never been a fallback. On December 4, 1991, Pan American World Airways ceased all operations after 64 years of service. The final flight ran from Bridgetown, Barbados to Miami, the same Caribbean skies where the rented float plane had started it all. Approximately 7,500 employees lost their jobs that day. Not over a restructuring quarter. That day. Pilots, mechanics, gate agents, cabin crew, people who had measured out 20 and 30 years of their lives in time zones and departure boards, who had worn that uniform like a second flag. They came to work on a Wednesday for the most famous airline on Earth, and by nightfall, it did not exist. There was no severance era to soften it, no next chapter to transfer into. The Blue Globe simply went dark, and 7,500 careers went dark with it. For the Lockerbie families, there was no ending at all, only a calendar. It took until 2001 for a Libyan intelligence agent, Abdelbasset Ali Mohamed al-Megrahi, to be convicted of the 270 murders, and until 2003 for Libya to accept responsibility and agree to pay the families billions. A historic settlement of over $2 billion that returned precisely no one. Even now, it isn't over. The man accused of building the bomb was taken into U.S. custody in 2022, and his trial, delayed once already, will finally get underway next April. 38 years of waiting for the families of people who were coming home for Christmas, which is why the name is suddenly everywhere again. A 6-part series, the bombing of Pan Am 103, began on BBC One in the UK on May 18, 2025. And on July 30, 2026, all 6 episodes premiered globally on Netflix. This week, as it happens. And here is the twist this story earns. In June 2025, Pan Am flew again. A new ownership group, Pan Am Global Holdings, led by CEO Craig Carter, chartered a Pan Am-branded 757-200 to carry 50 passengers on a 13-day Tracing the Transatlantic journey, priced at $59,950 per person, twin occupancy. Carter puts the mission plainly. What we're trying to create with the brand is bringing back what travel once was in that golden age of travel where Pan Am set the standards. And the ambition doesn't stop at nostalgia charters. The company is even evaluating reviving Pan Am as a scheduled airline, with Airbus A330s and A320s and about 16 planes expected in the next 5 years. The brand refuses to stay grounded. The airline never came back. Both things are true, and the gap between them is the whole story. Run your finger down Pan Am's logbook, and you will not find a rival's name anywhere in it. This was the most experienced airline in the world, and every fatal wound was written in its own hand. Build on a government favor. It's free. Bet the balance sheet on every new jet. It worked last time. Buy the wrong airline. It's the only one for sale. Sell the building, the hotels, the Pacific. It keeps the lights on. Cut security. No one will ever know. Hang the last plan on one partner's promise. There's no other offer. Every decision defensible. Every decision a withdrawal from an account nobody was refilling. Pan Am didn't lose the sky to a competitor. It sold the sky, one rescue at a time, and the name outlived the promise. Which is why, today, the name is worth $59,950 a seat, and the airline is worth nothing at all. A brand is the last asset to die, and the first thing the liquidators resurrect. Whatever you're building right now, the moment survival requires selling the thing customers actually loved you for, you haven't found a lifeline. You've found the exit. If this story was worth your time, the next one cuts deeper. An American company that put its name inside nearly every home in the country, and then bet all of it on a single handshake. Subscribe, and you'll be there when it drops.